From WFRV Local 5, your local election headquarters. This is Newsmaker Sunday.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Newsmaker Sunday. I'm Tom Zalaski. Well, we are heading into the campaign season. The first presidential debate has passed. The primaries are just around the corner. And joining us this morning is the head of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, Ben Wickler, who was elected to his position in 2019. Ben, thanks so much for joining us this morning. You are on a roll, you and your party. The Democrats have had a lot of victories lately in our state over the past couple of years. President Biden winning the state in 2020, Governor Evers reelected in 22. You've got the two state Supreme Court positions, creating that progressive majority. First time that happened in 15 years. How did all of that happen? How did this shift come about?
Well, Tom, it's great to be with you and your viewers today. And I think the story of Wisconsin, going from a state with a 5-2 conservative majority on our state Supreme Court and a Republican governor and attorney general and huge Republican majorities in the state legislature, to this moment, when so much of that has changed and the rest of it is about to change, it's really a story about the tenacity of Democrats at the grassroots level in communities all over northeastern Wisconsin and every other part of the state, who saw the way things were going and decided that they could be the heroes they were waiting for and to try to turn that around. You saw that in 2018 and 2023 with big Supreme Court victories. You saw that with work despite a hideously intensive gerrymander to ensure that Republicans didn't get enough votes to override the governor's vetoes, and the work to elect and then reelect Governor Evers and Attorney General Call. You see that right now in the work that Democrats are doing to recruit candidates. We have 97 out of the 99 assembly districts, we have candidates running compared to 84 for the Republicans. We have Democrats in every single state Senate district. We have champions like Kristen Lyerly for the U.S. House in the 8th Congressional District, and all 8 districts we have candidates this year. And you see that in the grassroots enthusiasm for Tammy Baldwin and for President Biden and Vice President Harris. This is a party built from below by people who think that we should fund our public schools and protect freedom for women and for everybody and have a democracy where the public decides on the leader instead of a leader who wants to be a dictator and overturn election results. That's really at the core of the story.
Ben, before we get further into the nuts and bolts of politics, let me touch a little bit on your very interesting background here. You've been a lifelong activist. You grew up in Madison, volunteered in politics going back to age 11, stuffing envelopes, and this shows you how old I am, stuffing envelopes for Ada Deer, your godmother. She is a political pioneer. She's a legend. What kind of influence did she have on your political involvement?
An enormous influence. My godmother, Ada Deer, was the first woman chair of the Menominee Nation. She grew up in a log cabin with no running water or electricity on the Menominee Reservation, and then became the first Menominee woman to graduate from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Her tribe was terminated. Federal recognition of her tribe was ended. And she decided to leave law school and move to Washington, D.C. to do something about it, and wound up passing a federal law that was signed by President Nixon that restored recognition of her tribe. And she said throughout her life, don't just complain, go do something about it. If there's something wrong in the world, you can make a difference. And I grew up admiring her so much and tried to internalize that for myself. And I've gotten to be part of groups of people really making change, from working in high school to help increase funding in our state legislature for public schools to when later on working in Washington, D.C. to stop the repeal of the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid, which almost happened. It came within one vote in the U.S. Senate, and then coming home to Wisconsin and now working to help to try to move politics forward in our state towards problem solving and actually making a difference instead of the kind of gridlock that we've seen for the last number of years, really, I would say, driven by Republicans in the legislature. So Ada Deer was a formative influence in my life, and I'm so grateful that my 3 kids got to know her as their great godmother. She came to all their birthday parties ever since we came back to our state.
You have been involved in the campaigns of Tammy Baldwin, Ed Garvey, Russ Feingold, but you also have an association with Al Franken, comedian, former U.S. Senator. How did that come about?
So I grew up in Madison when The Onion was a campus newspaper, the satirical newspaper with fake news articles that make you laugh every time you look at a headline. And I thought it was so great. So in middle school and high school, and I went to public schools in Madison, I had underground student newspapers modeled on The Onion with my friends, and we kept sending them copies of it. One day they invited us to come in, and I started to write for them in high school and college. So when I was a senior in college, Al Franken came, and he learned about my background in politics and with The Onion. And I got to work with him on the book Lies and the Lying Liars Who Tell Them a Fair and Balanced Look at the Right, which became a massive bestseller, but also took a kind of a lighthearted look at some serious issues in politics. He went on to run for the U.S. Senate. I went on to work for Sherrod Brown's U.S. Senate campaign and worked in politics across the country before coming home to Madison. So for me, I do think it's important to look at the lighter side. Sometimes politics can be so grim, but we're all human beings. There's a lot to laugh about, and sometimes it can help to bring a little perspective to very dismaying news cycles if you look for the jokes that are buried just beneath the surface.
Back to the Wisconsin Democratic Party. It has been hailed, and I quote, as the winning machine by Politico and recognized by the Washington Post as 2020 State Party of the Year. What do you attribute that success to?
Well, in 2020, in the spring, we had the first general election held during the COVID pandemic. You might remember polling places were closing all over the state, especially in Milwaukee. The governor tried to delay the election, as other states in Democratic and Republican states had done, but the state legislature said no, it had to happen without any kind of change in procedure or in timing. And we organized virtually. We organized and supported people casting absentee ballots all over the state. We wound up winning that election. Then that fall, a huge push. We wound up having 20,000 volunteers in Wisconsin to defeat Donald Trump and elect Joe Biden. We won by 0.6 of 1 percentage point. Then Trump tried to overturn the election results. He tried to have the absentee ballots just in Milwaukee and Madison thrown out. And it went up to our state Supreme Court. And we won by a single vote. If we hadn't won the election that spring, then Trump would have overturned the election result here and thrown out the will of the people. That was a danger we narrowly averted, but I think that's how we got that recognition as State Party of the Year, because it took working year-round all over the state to add up to a victory in the state that tipped the entire presidential election. And that's the kind of experience that for our volunteers keeps them coming back, because they know that they were part of something that really changed American history. And I think we're going to do the same thing this year.
We continue our conversation with Democratic Party Chairman Ben Wickler when we come back, so please stay with us. And back now with the chair of Wisconsin's Democratic Party, Ben Wickler. Ben, millions watched the presidential debate, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and as you well know, the post-debate storyline had nothing to do with policy. It was all about Joe Biden's performance. Your assessment of what you saw in that debate, from Joe Biden specifically?
Well, I wish that Joe Biden had had a cup of coffee and a lozenge before he went up on that stage. I think the moment when you could hear him kind of rasping and trying to clear his throat, everyone took a little gasp. As the night went on, he picked up steam. And as you saw later in the course of the debate, Donald Trump kept refusing to say that he would accept the results of the election. He kept defending January 6th and having these poetic memories of how great everything was on January 6th. There was a real contrast there. And, on one level, there was kind of style and delivery. And on the other level, there was substance. I actually think that as people look back and think about Trump defending abortion bans and destroying Roe versus Wade and talking about these attacks on democracy and pulling out of NATO versus Joe Biden really defending the core ideas of American freedom and American leadership in the world and democracy in our country, those things will wear better for Biden. And today, Biden's out on the stump. He just gave quite a speech in North Carolina. He said, I know I'm not the youngest guy. I may not talk as smoothly as I used to or walk as smoothly as I used to, but I know that I can do this job. I know how to tell the truth, and I know right from wrong. And that's a message that I think will resonate.
And to quote what you had just said, again, from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I have the president's comments here, and he said, quote, "Folks, I don't walk as easy as I used to. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. I don't debate as well as I used to, but I know how to tell the truth. I know right from wrong, and I know how to do this job. I know, like millions of Americans know, when you get knocked down, you get back up." Ben, do you think the debate will move the needle at all, or is everyone pretty much entrenched at this point as to who they're going to vote for?
You know, it's interesting. Among voters who watch the news, probably people watching this program, you have a pretty good sense of who you support and who lines up with your values. For people not paying attention, they maybe see a clip on social media from the debate and they think, oh my goodness, but it's June. So there's going to be a lot more moments that can break through, go viral, reach tens of millions of people who generally avoid the news between now and November. And I think that's one reason why it's good to have a debate early like this. Then we'll have the national conventions. We'll see what Trump has to offer, who he threatens, and what he plans to do if he loses the election. I don't know if he'll use the word bloodbath on the national stage, but he's used it before. And then we'll see from Joe Biden, and really a deep commitment to the idea that all of us have equal dignity and precious worth, that all of our freedom is worth fighting for, and that our government should be on the side of working people. The first president to walk a picket line, and Joe Biden will be the president who helps build up the middle class and bring down costs, even if it means going toe-to-toe with big special interests and companies like the drug companies that overcharge for prescription drugs. I think that contrast is a winning contrast that'll help Democrats win this election. And there's months to go to make sure that the whole thing is clear for voters.
Ben, do you think there are still undecided voters out there, really?
So it's interesting. I don't think that there are many undecided voters who've been paying attention, but I think there are a lot of voters who've had the luxury since Biden became president of not having to think about politics every second of the day. When Trump was president, you'd wake up in the morning and there would be some new horror on the notification screen of your phone. Under President Biden, he's out there doing the work and not in the flashiest way, but it means that there's a lot of voters who've tuned out. What we've seen in our research and what we've seen when we knock on doors is that for people not paying attention, they might fall into that 17% of voters that think Biden had something to do with the end of Roe versus Wade. Well, Trump brags that he was the guy who ended Roe versus Wade. He's really proud of it. He appointed the Supreme Court justices. They did exactly what he wanted them to do. But if you're one of those 17%, then maybe you kind of like Biden more, but you really think that abortion should be a personal decision, something that women and their doctors can decide on, not politicians. Well, for those voters, have we got news for them? You can have reproductive freedom and Joe Biden at the same time, and you can't have Trump and those two things at the same time. So I do think that there are voters out there who, because we're a free country, no one has to pay attention to politics, who've tuned out. And we have an opportunity to reach them with the information that demonstrates that President Biden is on their side, shares their values. And I would argue Donald Trump is not on their side, does not share their values. He's in it for himself. That's a contrast that I think can move the needle with the voters that have been avoiding politics. Maybe they think the whole system is messed up and they don't want to have anything to do with it, but politics is interested in them. Their freedom will be affected by this election, and we want to make sure that they know exactly how that works before they decide whether to cast a ballot this November and who to vote for.
Ben, earlier in the program, you mentioned our state redistricting. How do you think that is going to change things come November in Wisconsin?
This is one of the sleeper stories of this entire election year. Wisconsin was the state with the most intense partisan gerrymander in the nation. It was a state where in 2012 and 2018, Democrats won majorities of the votes for state assembly in our state legislature. Republicans still took away almost all of the state legislative seats because they'd rigged the district lines to ensure that they would never lose power. But now that is over. Because voters organized and mobilized and elected a Supreme Court majority over 6 years, 5 long years, 3 different elections that changed the composition of the majority. Because of that work, we now have fair maps in the state of Wisconsin. Governor Evers signed them into law. They're here to stay. And it means that whoever wins most of the seats wins most, it means that whoever wins most of the votes wins most of the seats. So if you're a voter who's been concerned that public schools aren't getting funded enough, that our state government isn't taking action to clean up forever chemicals, if you're concerned that we haven't accepted federal dollars to expand healthcare and expand Badger care in our state, if you're frustrated that we don't have common sense gun safety policies, all those things are the responsibility of Republicans in the state legislature who refuse to do what most voters, what the governor, what most folks in Wisconsin have proposed. And now, if we can vote out the people who said no to all those common sense policies, vote in people who will say yes, and actually get change on the ground in people's lives in a way that makes a difference in families all across Wisconsin. So this is producing enormous grassroots energy, We have candidates all over the state, all over northeastern Wisconsin. We're going to flip state assembly and state senate seats. I think it'll help turn out voters to win the presidential race, to reelect Tammy Baldwin, to win House races. And it will also directly change people's lives in a way that can restore some faith in a political system that sometimes is a cause for concern and dismay. I really hope we can bring back the idealism that's emblazoned in our state capitol, where it quotes Fighting Bob La Follette and says, "The will of the people shall be the law of the land." That's how it's supposed to work. We have a chance for that now.
Wisconsin's Democratic Party Chair Ben Wickler, our guest this morning, and we have much more to come with him right after this, so please stay right there. And we are back this morning with Wisconsin Democratic Party Chair Ben Wickler. Democrats held their state convention earlier this month in Milwaukee. Did you accomplish what you set out to do in your estimation, Ben?
The most important thing at our state convention was gathering members. We had more than 1,000 people across the state register as delegates and as guests to hear from the governor, to hear from Senator Tammy Baldwin, to hear from our keynote speaker, Jamie Harrison, the DNC chair, and Governor J.B. Pritzker, really setting the stage for the contrast between the Democratic National Convention slated for Chicago this year and the Republican National Convention in that great city on a great lake, Milwaukee, which Trump called a horrible city recently. That contrast, I really feel like, rang through, and people were energized and fired up to volunteer and get involved. We have trainings, we have a million things happen at our conventions, but that moment of party unity, of gathering together and sharing a kind of recommitment to the purpose of the party, that was a real highlight for me.
For the upcoming national convention, how focused on the abortion issue is your party?
Well, what we've found over and over is that for voters that are frustrated, understandably, about the cost of eggs, and they want a president who will tackle and bring down lower prices, for voters who are concerned about a whole slate of different issues, President Biden is working on all those things. But the thing that actually sticks out the most is this question about whether our most personal, intimate decisions, the decisions that affect whether and when we start a family, whether those should be made by us, whether those should be made by women and their doctors and the people directly affected, or made by politicians. And in Wisconsin, we've experienced this directly because for 451 days after Trump's Supreme Court justices terminated Roe versus Wade, all abortion services in Wisconsin came to a halt. And there were women in our state who bled for days before their doctors would give them the care that they needed. And only then, because they had multiple doctors and lawyers signing off that the women would die if they didn't get that care. That is a nightmarish situation. These are medical decisions that should be made by the people who are directly affected. And in this election, what we find is that, for all the issues bouncing back and forth and the viral clips people see on their different screens, these questions about freedom are maybe the most powerful thing that moves voters to support President Biden, where otherwise they might think about Trump, or to vote if they otherwise might not vote at all. I think it'll be a big deal at the national convention. I think it'll be a big deal for voters all the way through election day. And I think it'll matter in state legislative races. In Dr. Lyerly's race for the 8th Congressional District, she is a champion of reproductive freedom against a group of MAGA Republicans that oppose it. And in Tammy Baldwin's race against Eric Hovde, who supports a total abortion ban. And in Biden's race against Trump. Trump, who put the people in place who killed Roe versus Wade, and Joe Biden, who wants to put Roe versus Wade into American law.
And we are back to wrap up with Ben Wickler right after this. So please stay with us. And we are back now with Ben Wickler of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, the chair. Busy election year ahead. With our remaining time, I want to talk about a couple of the big races for Wisconsin. Ben, of course, Joe Biden, the election against Donald Trump. What does Joe Biden have to do to win Wisconsin?
President Biden is spending a ton of time in Wisconsin. I'm so grateful for that. He needs to make sure that this race is foremost in people's minds and people see the choice between Donald Trump, who appointed the justices who terminated Roe versus Wade, who tried to overturn an election through a violent insurrection, who's running to be a dictator on day one. That's Donald Trump's words, and who wants to weaponize the power of the government to punish his enemies, reward his friends, and give handouts to his billionaire buddies, against Joe Biden, who wants to restore Roe versus Wade, defend freedom for people to make their own medical decisions, protect democracy, and deliver for working folks, like the folks who were on that picket line with him when he was marching for better contracts for auto workers. That's who Joe Biden is. And if people see that choice, I think Joe Biden's going to win Wisconsin.
And in the minute or so I've got left, how about these state races? What do the state Democrats need to do to win?
In the state legislature and in Dr. Lyerly's House race and Tammy Baldwin's Senate race, it's strikingly similar. At every level of the ballot, it's MAGA extremists who want Trump to have the powers of a dictator and who want to take away people's basic freedoms against a Democratic Party that is the big tent party of common sense, that thinks that voters should choose their leaders, that people should make their own decisions, and that our government should be on the side of working people, not wealthy special interests. That's the case Democrats are making at every level of this campaign. It's a winning, unified message, and it's something that I think will ultimately carry the day when the polls close at 8 p.m. on November 5th this fall.
Ben Wickler, the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, sir. A pleasure to have you on. And if you have a newsmaker in your town that you think we should have on this program, let us know about it. Send us an email to tips@wearegreenbay.com, or you can message us on Facebook. And be sure to join us once again Sunday morning at 7:30. Until then, have a great day.